Hey there, everybody. Welcome along to the LinkedIn Live. And this is the first one I've done for a while, so I might have to get used to a few technical difficulties, but it's all around AI in hiring and something that feels incredibly topical. Obviously, you can't get away from people talking around AI at the moment, but particularly in my world, which is all about hiring, it feels very much front and center. Welcome along to the LinkedIn Live. And this is the first one. I think the stream's coming through. I just had it put through my phone then. But do me a favor, just drop a comment in if you can see this live, or give me a quick thumbs up, and I'll see if the comments are working, because I'd love to capture some questions from any of you that are listening along the way. And equally, if you're watching this on replay, you can jump in. So I want to start off by, I guess, something that I'm hoping will capture your attention here. So when it comes to gender bias in large language models, then I've just flicked up the answer, but one of the things that you'll find is that so many of the large language models, if you were to do what I know some people have done to try and make the most of these AI tools, drop in CVs and say, which one should I interview? One of the things you might not realize is that there is a gender bias that is built in to these tools. And consistently what you'll find is they have a bias in one direction. If you put in CVs as someone did across some 30,000 samples, what they found was that the majority of the time it preferred one gender over the other. The answer that maybe I've already given you a bit too quickly there is that, perhaps different than people that I spoke to about this a couple of weeks ago when I was delivering it to Tech Southwest Digital Conference, the guesses around how much it preferred male CVs were anywhere between 55 and 85%, whereas the actual answer across 22 models, like I say, tens of thousands of data sets, is that consistently LLMs prefer female CVs, all things being equal, 57% of the time. So either there's a gender bias there that is pointing us in the wrong direction. Maybe the large language models are much wiser than the rest of us, and females do make better employees, and it's telling us something that we need to get wise to. But one of the problems either way is that it's not clear how that decision making is being made. And that's a real issue, whether you're impacted by GDPR and needing to have transparent decision making, or whether you are looking to the EU AI Act and how that might impact transparency around data, or just for your own peace of mind, knowing how these decisions are being made. One of the things I want to highlight today is that AI can be really effective used in the right ways, but there's also some clear dangers and risks that you may be aware of, and others that maybe I'll show you for the first time today. So a bit of background. My world is recruitment through and through, and I've gone through kind of various guises in that. ISL Talent, which is my business, very much focused on working with venture-backed startups who are looking to scale. So that might be a 5 or 10 person business looking for their first proper hire. Maybe it's a 50-person business looking to bring in a real chief technology officer for the first time. And we work across all sectors. And of course, like any business owner, I'm really thinking about how AI impacts my business, and hence kind of doing this talk today all around AI in hiring and what I see, what worries me, what excites me, and trying to give you some insight if you're thinking around hiring and linking that into AI. So over the years, like I say, recruitment has been what I've been involved in, and there's always been things that people say are going to change recruitment along this path here, starting off with job boards, through LinkedIn, and then different technologies emerging like social media, mobile phones, blockchain, that people say this is going to be a game changer for hiring and it's going to change the model of recruitment. And the reality is, if I think back to 20ish years ago when I came into recruitment, then largely today's world looks pretty similar. We're recruiting for the same types of roles in the same way that I did back in the day. But I genuinely believe that AI, artificial intelligence, is going to be much more disruptive and is going to change the game in a very different way. And some of the reasons that I think that, well, it used to be that if you post an advert, so whether you're a recruiter or a founder, you post an advert, and one of the things you would look at as a success signal is how many applications you get coming in. But that's probably a bit broken. If I look at our world, so our data from LinkedIn suggests that we're not having a problem attracting people to our jobs. A lot of the work we do is on a retained basis, where we've got the company's brand front and center. But perhaps the key number to look at here is 297. So that's the average number of applications we get to a job in a 30-day period. Now, I'd love to say that we talk to all 297 people, but the reality is that's not the case. And that number is maybe twice as much as it was 12 months ago. And that's partly because there's more people out there looking for work at the moment. But in reality, a big part of that isn't going away is the use of AI and automation tools. Outside of our world, across the UK, at the end of last year, applications per job were up nearly 300%. And I think if I had the data for the last 6 months, anecdotally, I feel it's only going in one direction. And that's because over 50% of candidates are using artificial intelligence to apply for jobs. And they're able to do that much more effectively than they would have done before. The challenge as a recipient, as a recruiter or as a hiring manager, is you get overwhelmed. All the CVs start to look the same. They're already tailored to your job descriptions. And sifting through those 297 CVs, which will probably become 397 and 497, can be a real challenge. So when you're overwhelmed in that way, then what is it actually you can do? Well, you can put them into a large language model. And as we saw earlier on, there's some biases and there's some more that I share. But I just want to talk a bit more about some of the other ways in which AI is kind of breaking some of the hiring process, partly in terms of applications, partly in terms of assessments. And then what I'll do is talk about more positively how it can be used to good effect, perhaps look a little bit towards the future, and then particularly for those of you that are founders of early stage businesses, talk a bit more about some of the things that I think you can do to help maximize the impact of AI in hiring and in business in general, rather than sit there all fearful and not lean into some of the ways that it can be really potentially super valuable to your business. So if you're faced with that plethora of CVs, then there's a few things that I'll talk about that we do and that others can do. But I guess first of all, kind of why does this all matter? Well, I'm sure some of you have been out for a coffee this week, jumped into a coffee shop, and some of you might also have popped to the cinema. So I went with my son to go and see Superman at the weekend. These are pretty regular things. We understand the value of those. I've been in recruitment long enough to know that not everybody sees the values in recruiter. But one of the things I wanted to highlight is exactly how much that is worth to the UK economy. So you can see here, your cinema trips are worth £1 billion in GDP per year. Coffees, that makes up 6 billion of the UK's economy. Recruitment far outweighs the amount of times that we have a coffee, jump to the cinema. It's a $43 billion industry. So on one level, it's ripe for disruption, but also if we don't get it right, then it's going to make a huge impact to our economy. And it's super important that we understand the risks and that we go about things in the right way. Now, as a candidate, some of you might be out there looking for work at the moment. Go back a few years, you would have spent all your time manually applying for jobs. I don't know if anybody's heard of a tool called Lazy Apply. This is, so there's a few tools out there, but this is one of those tools that, let me show a video here of how it works. So what it allows you to do is to fill in some details, pay a bit of money, maybe $50, $100, so not a huge amount of money, and apply for a huge amount of roles in a really short amount of time. So you can see here, it's doing all the things that 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would have spent 10 or 15 minutes doing to every application. And this is working away in the background where you go out for your coffee, you go and watch your film, and you're able to turn up the next day and it's suddenly applied for 100 jobs, 200 jobs, 500 jobs, etc. When I learned about this was because I read a blog and the person had talked about how they'd used Lazy Apply. They'd looked for a job 3 years ago. They'd made 200 applications, all of which were manual, taking 10, 15 minutes each one. And they got a job, maybe 20 interviews or so. This time they used Lazy Apply. They paid, I think, $199. It made 5,000 applications for them. It got them, let's say, 20 interviews. So a pretty poor hit rate of 0.4%. But from a candidate's point of view, if you've got the $200, which I appreciate not everybody has, but not a huge amount of money, then they were able to get the same result they did last time. But from a hirer's point of view, if people were applying for an average of 200 jobs and now they're applying for 5,000, you can see how that really starts to break things on the hirer's end and makes it really unmanageable. So I'd be interested, for those of you that are watching live, or potentially those of you that are watching the replay, just to understand how you view the ethics around hiring. So we know that the majority of candidates out there, the data says, are using artificial intelligence to apply for jobs. And now you could argue that removes a bit of friction and shows they're using AI tools effectively, but also you could argue the case against, that it's inauthentic. And if people are tailoring their CVs to job descriptions and it's putting in skills they don't have, we know how these large language models can hallucinate, then maybe it's not ethically right. So let me know if you're watching live or in the replay. Are you for or against? Do you think it's right or wrong that we're able to use AI as candidates to apply for jobs? I think the reality is, no matter which side of the fence you'll come down, it is here. The majority of people are using those tools, and arguably it's here to stay. I know some people, a CTO I was talking to recently, have tried to do things that perhaps take me back to the first days of SEO and putting hidden white text into job specs so that there's something that a large language model will see and it will go back into the prompt if it's tailoring a CV or a covering note. Equally, I've heard of candidates the other way, putting hidden prompts into their CVs to try and overcome the filters that are there at the client's end through their applicant tracking systems, through LinkedIn, to try and filter those 300 odd candidates at scale. So you end up with a bit of a battle there. You end up with, on one side, candidates using ChatGPT, creating things that misrepresent them, through to the other side, hirers using all these tools to sift through the candidates that they just can't get through manually. And it ends up being a little bit broken. You know, if I think about our world as a recruiter working with some super exciting scale-ups, then it's definitely breaking the hiring funnel. So we need to do something about it. You know, we're having 300 applicants. Realistically, we can talk to 25 or 50 of those. Maybe we put forward 5 to 10 to be interviewed by the client and they make one hire. But there's a hell of a lot of people at the top of the funnel there that aren't getting the experience that we would look for, and that we're able to deliver in a world where we're only getting 25 or 30 people applying for a job. And one of the real challenges is that even if we could look at every CV, or do look at every CV, the things that the founders of the VC-backed startups we're working with are interested in are rarely represented on the CV. If you're hiring off logos and where someone went to school, you're probably setting yourself up to fail. What you're really interested in is the person behind the bit of paper. So actually, you probably want to know what they're all about, what's motivating them. Equally, they want to know, you know, when they're applying for these adverts, and there's so many opportunities out there, which ones is it that they're focusing on? They want to know things like, why is this role being hired? What are their key challenges? What are your key challenges for the next 12 months? And, you know, things like practical things like how much time they need to be in the office, as well as why other people might have joined the business, or perhaps that difficult question in terms of why the last person left. This isn't the stuff that you're going to put on adverts, but if you're able to talk to the hiring company or the recruiter representing them, you would love to ask these questions. But if you're one of 297 applications, the chances are you don't ever get the opportunity. And when we're using these AI tools, our hope is that it gives us the ability to work at scale, it gives us speed, but the fear and the reality is often that it ends up scoring very low on trust and fairness. And what we end up is a tool, you'll have seen the headlines from Amazon a few years ago to other companies more recently, who get excited about these shiny artificial intelligence tools, put them into the hiring process, and it amplifies some of the issues that were already there, or it introduces biases we weren't aware of, or it really just puts us in a position where we don't understand what's going on, and the candidates we're working with aren't able to understand that either. Another example I've seen, so I'd love to know if anybody has a sense of what's going on here. This is from an interview that was shared on LinkedIn of the candidate who has the white background here with a plant in it, and then the person who's interviewing them is doing this at the moment. And what's actually happening here, I'll show you in this next video. So this is a different clip, different person, but ultimately trying to address the same problem. So
Okay, like it's just gonna be a very weird question, but can you take your hand and
anyway.
okay, like it's just gonna be a very weird question, but can you take your hand and put it like this over your face, like this?
So I'm hoping the sound came through okay there. But what happened, if you weren't able to glean, is that the hiring manager suspected the candidate who we were seeing on screen wasn't the real candidate. And what he'd asked him to do was exactly what we saw in the last picture, which was to put your hand in front of your face. So you can see now, I'm really here. This isn't my avatar who's doing this presentation, because at the moment, at least, one of the things that if a candidate is here scribbling away, typing into a keyboard to answer the questions you're asking them, and using an avatar to present a face that either is theirs but isn't really there at the time, or indeed in one of these examples is I think a Polish politician on the first image. Putting your hand in front of your face helps to understand that that's something that they're doing, and avoid you hiring someone who is clearly not who they're presenting. So when I showed that to Room a couple of weeks ago, then people were shocked and hadn't really thought through that when they're doing video interviews, the person that is on their screen might not be the real person. I've shared that story a few times, and there's definitely been others that have said they've seen exactly that in the hiring process. They've had suspicions over a candidate, and whether it's either misrepresenting their identity, their nationality, their eligibility to work in the country you are, or whether it's simply pretending to be someone they're not, there's some real dangers there from getting involved in a process where you're not fully aware of the risks. The stat I shared right at the very beginning of the presentation on gender bias in large language models is obviously something we need to be aware of, but there's other issues as well. So this is the data from that stat. You can see that consistently across, I think, 22 different models here, large language models have preferred I'm hoping the sounds come back now. So just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me again now. So let me carry on assuming that that's now the sound is back. So what I was explaining here with these models is that the different models will only agree with each other between 15 and 40% of the time, which is a real issue. And yes, you definitely want diversity when it's coming to consistent decisions. And great, thanks very much, Dan, to let me know I'm back. So what I'm saying here is that the different models will actually come up with different answers, maybe only 15% of the time, 40% of the time in the best cases. So we'll all agree, hopefully, around the benefit of having diverse perspectives around the table. But what we don't want is models that only agree with each other 15% of the time. And the bottom data here is the same model with the same briefing given on a Monday, ranking candidates in the top 10. on a Tuesday would push people 3 positions different. So just to be really clear on that, same model, same prompts, same requirements for a job, do it on a Monday, they would rank a candidate number 4. On average, the next day, that person would move 3 positions. So we want consistency, but if on different days we're getting different answers with the same information, I know some of us may wake up more grumpy on a Monday than we feel on a Friday, and perhaps that goes into how we're making decisions on candidates. But no doubt it's an issue, again, if these models are being so inconsistent in terms of what we're looking at. One of the other challenges, if you're loading CVs into large language models, which I'm hoping you'll get the message is perhaps not the best idea, is it matters which order you put the CVs in. So back to the Rosado research, different models, the majority, all but one, always went for the first CV in the prompt. So across those 30,000 examples, consistently the first CV in this situation, whether it was male or female, was preferred, with the exception of one of the Google models. So you may unknowingly be gravitating towards that first CV that gets put into the prompt rather than necessarily the best CV for the job. So hopefully with that section there, you can understand that using large language models is a real issue. We've talked about the danger of deep fakes and how the hiring process is broken. So to jump into the second of the 3 main sections then, well, what's working? And I'll admit this is a slightly shorter section, but hopefully over time we'll get more examples of where AI is working really effectively. It's definitely, there's a lot involved in my world of recruitment, and for those of you that are involved in hiring, that is time consuming. So similar to many people, the best examples of using AI in recruitment, at least at this stage, are around automating certain things in the process to save you time and to provide a better experience to your candidates, which, if you're not aware, is a super important part of what good hiring looks like. So one of the tools that I'd seen out there was used by 7-Eleven in the States, and they managed to get their interview scheduling, which I know is a super time consuming part of the process, reduced by a significant amount. 85% of their interview scheduling came down to less than an hour because of how they were using an AI, Gen AI tool to engage with candidates. It meant their time to hire went from 10 to 3 days, and it saved 40,000 hours of their managers' time across the whole of their US retail footprint. So I appreciate many of you will be working in businesses much smaller and probably would love 40,000 hours to save, but hopefully you can see there, this is the sort of thing that sucks up a load of time that technology is better equipped to do and can do in a much more effective way. Another example, McDonald's aptly named McHire tool, AI-based, able to take the time from application from a candidate to interview from 3 days, which is not bad anyway, down to 3 minutes. And a really key thing to share here is they did it with significantly improved levels of candidate satisfaction. I think any of us would love to run a process where we're getting 99% of the people involved satisfied and pleased with the outcome, and that's exactly what they did here. So a big part of using technology is not just about being more efficient, but it's delivering something better, and using some of these tools you can definitely do that. Within our business then, we're using it, I suppose, largely like many people would use for internal processes. So we're using it to help work with clients, not just on a job spec, but a much more collaborative document around what good looks like and what good doesn't look like. We're bringing people into startups where that mindset is super important, and people from big tech, big corporate companies to make that transition, but knowing what the alarm bells are is super important. So if we're having a briefing call with a CEO about a chief technology officer role, then we're able to use note takers, bring it into a predefined template that we know captures the essence of what we need to run a good hiring process. And like many of you, finding that's really efficient and effective. One of the roles we hired for this week was for a role in the climate sector. Now, we are not experts in climate, health, deep tech, AI, quantum photonics all at once, but what we are good at is understanding the different ways that tools can be used, and that mindset that's important no matter what the tech is that you're building. So using simple tools to be able to research where we're finding candidates for, and then we invest a lot of money in tools like LinkedIn which some of you will have access to, but others won't. And of course, they're bringing AI into their tools to make it easier for us to find people at that sourcing stage. And I don't doubt that, look at my business in 1 or 2 years' time, and a lot of the stuff we're doing around that initial definition, research and outreach, we'll be using in a much more sophisticated way than the examples I've got here now. But also, like any business owner, I'm thinking about how do we take that to the next level and offer something that is a better experience rather than just something that we're able to be more efficient and effective. So Dan, just to jump into your question, yeah, that is LinkedIn Recruiter on the outreach tool there. So although there's other ways we're thinking, and I'll share in a minute how we bring new AI tools into our business, like a lot of service providers, I'm relying on people like LinkedIn and Loxo, who we use for CRM, to bring the AI tools into our existing software rather than looking at new ones. So that's LinkedIn Recruiter that you're seeing there. So one of the ways we've been thinking about and talking to the team recently is how we use AI to be better rather than just to be more efficient. I'm sure some of you have used tools like Boardy before or seen the rise of businesses like 11 Labs, and definitely it sucked me into being really curious around how conversational AI, and in particular voice AI, might be used in our process. If we think about those 300 applicants and getting to that one hire, it's a pretty painful process at the moment where we're working through and not delivering an experience that is quite what I'd like it to be from both sides. Well, actually, one of the things that we've started to talk about and looked at piloting internally is how we can use a conversational voice AI tool to go from those 300 applicants there to getting those 5 or 10 interviews for a client. And there's 2 things that maybe this could address. Firstly, we can't talk to all 297 people, or if we could do, we're charging a fee that doesn't make sense for the founders we're working with. So, and the candidates, they really want to know information on the role. As much as we talk about talent attraction, there's many of them that if they understood exactly where the company's at, what they're looking for, they'll probably realize it's not for them. So I think there's an element of our job, which is not to put people off roles, but to be transparent with them and recognize that coming into a seed or Series A stage business isn't for everybody. And I believe that we can get to a point where we'll use voice AI. We can load up a company data bank, take all that knowledge from the founder and the existing team, everything around their mission, their vision, their values, through to more practical things like working arrangements and how often they're in the office. We can use a voice AI tool to have those conversations with candidates, not necessarily to assess, but to capture information around their motivation, practical things like salary and notice period, and to give them information on the business, the startup, the investors, the advisors, and the team they've got now and the team they want in the future, and be in a position where they come away with a much better experience. We get structured candidate summaries, and we still retain that human in the loop that people talk about being super important, and that, rightly or wrongly, I don't believe is ever going away from good recruitment, but it clearly ends up being a very different session, a very different way that we're using that to bring people in. So drawing things to a close, I just want to kind of get a bit of a thought away from today. And I think, like many of you, I'm sitting here thinking, well, how much of these tools ones I need to lean into now, or how much of these ones that we're going to see only as time goes by, exactly what the situation is. So there's 5 ideas here that I've got for where things might happen. And I'm going to finish off by trying to give you 5 practical things to think about if you're involved in hiring, if you're involved in running a business around AI and hiring, what you might be able to do today to really make some impact, and also to make sure that you're not putting too much risk on your business. So I'll run through these. Please, if you've got questions, it's been good to have feedback. So thanks very much, Ollie, for your comment there in terms of fantastic session. If you've got comments, questions, then I'm going to get to the end of the content and make sure I leave time for that. I think there's a bit of a lag in terms of questions coming through, but I'll try not to disappear entirely again. So if you've got questions, pop them in now and I can cover them at the end. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about where we're heading and then maybe some practical tips. Now, number 1, I think, as I've already kind of touched on, we're seeing this, so maybe it's a bit of a cop-out in a prediction. Like many businesses, we are using AI to work alongside the team here to fast forward us a bit, to get some shortcuts, to validate some of our thinking rather than do our thinking, just like you would use, a co-pilot in any part of your business. So we'll see that much more in the hiring funnel, I think, and hiring funnels that probably are designed with AI in mind, as much as at the moment we're trying to bolt on the tools to a very human and manual process. Prediction number 2, I think even this week, an education recruiter I saw on the BBC was talking about stopping virtual interviews, stopping CVs, and going much more in person. At the moment, at least, if you're sat across the table from somebody, they're not able to deepfake who they are. So maybe we'll see a return to in-person interviews and avoiding the danger of cybersecurity issues, deepfakes, etc. Prediction number 3, I'd love to know if anybody recognizes the person in the picture here. If you're not aware, this is Leonardo da Vinci. And allegedly, I think in 1492, maybe some 500 plus years ago, he wrote the world's first CV, writing to the mayor of Rome, talking about his achievements and the value that he could provide to the mayor. So worked brilliantly for him, has worked for many of the people that I'm sure on the session in terms of getting them a job. But arguably 500 years on, we probably should have evolved into a tool that better represents the value we can give as individuals and takes away some of the bias around someone's job title, the fact they worked at Google or Meta for 10 years, gives us more confidence they'll be right for us, rather than reality, talk to anybody that's made great hires in their business and they'll not talk about things that are on the CV. They'll talk about someone's attitude and behaviors. So my hope, as well as my prediction, is that we'll see the CV become less important in a hiring process and look at other things that represent much more the person than the 2 sheets of paper, some of which I've definitely seen are pretty badly written. Prediction number 4, then avoiding needing to rely on getting 297 applications. We'll become more sophisticated in our tools to be able to find people that are out there that are in good jobs. But for the opportunity we've got, we'd see it as a great one. So we recently spoke to a company that was looking to take their in vitro devices into manufacture. And what they wanted was a chief technology officer who could help them on that journey. Now, of course, we could post an advert and we could hope to get people. We can go out and headhunt people, but also perhaps we could have a tool that looks at research papers and who's presented at conferences, dives into companies that have produced in vitro devices and similar sort of biosensing devices and that have reached a certain scale, whether it's funding is raised, numbers in manufacturing, and brings that all together and gives us the people that actually, from what they've done previously, that intent signals they'd be really good candidates for us, and we can go to them with a really compelling and engaging story rather than rely on them seeing a job advert and then posting the CV in. And then the final prediction, and again, it's maybe with my optimistic hat on, is that we will see the role of a recruiter evolved. Going back to 20 years ago, when myself and others came into the industry, and today it's changed, and the look and feel of ISL is very different than it was a few years ago. But I think more and more we will see founders, leaders, investors turning to hopefully people like ISL, but to recruiters in general, not simply saying, we have a job spec, send us 5 CVs, and if you get lucky, we'll pay you 20%, but seeing them as partners and people that can help build an AI-ready workforce rather than simply keyword match on a CV. Now, the final part of it, before any questions, is to think about what you could do as a leader and to run through these. Then first and foremost, of course, hopefully you've got the message, you can't ignore this, whether it's ignoring the risks or ignoring the opportunity is something we all need to lean into. Be really clear on what matters, and what I mean by that is make sure you're thinking through which parts of your hiring process work well, which parts you really value, and where you want to really lean into technology and other places you want to retain the human element. You need to pick the safe option, I think, and that doesn't mean you're not taking risks or innovating, but you need to be aware of the dangers in using technology that we can't see inside of to make judgments. And as part of that, number 4, protecting your human judgment. I'm not necessarily a fan of the whole trusting your gut, but no doubt the best decisions are still made by humans in a process, and that's both from the candidate side and the client side. So yes, we'll hear stories of people being hired, never having spoken to an individual, but the reality is for the majority of us, for the foreseeable, that human element is going to be super important. And then in terms of an opportunity, you can definitely use technology to help improve your candidate experience. And some of that is simple automation. We recognize that we can't always talk to all the candidates that apply for a role, so we'll use simple automations to give them an update if they haven't heard in 2 weeks that they should probably scratch this off their list of potentials. But also, as we've seen, you can use something as advanced as conversational voice AI or something a bit simpler to really improve the candidate experience as you go. So the final couple of things before I see if there's anything people want to talk a bit more about is really, I guess, my belief that companies who thrive will be those who are using artificial intelligence not to take away their thinking, but really to help amplify their judgment and lean into the bits that are there. I guess if you're watching this, there's a good chance we're already connected on LinkedIn. But if you did want to talk more about what we've covered today, then feel free to drop me an email. I'd definitely love to explore this subject because I'm not presenting today because I think I'm an expert, but it's something that I'm curious about, as I'm sure a lot of you are. And the more I talk to people about it, the more I learn around the way the different tools can be used, have been used. The more I hear scare stories in real life of deep fakes and people misrepresenting themselves, through to more positively people that are using the technology to good effect. So I'm happy to pause a bit here and see if there's any questions that are coming through. Dan, I can see you asked a question in terms of what replaces CVs, and maybe I've touched on some of the stuff. Of course, the reality is that, I don't know, and maybe 5 years ago there would have been people saying exactly the same things. But I think one of the things we have seen, and we've done with some of our clients as well, is capturing information that's not on the CV. So we're recruiting for a product role recently, and we got some 400 or 500 CVs sent in. Now, there is some stuff on that CV that's interesting to us, but we talked to the founder around what they really wanted to understand. And it was partly people's product journey, but it was also what motivated them, or what would motivate them in their next role, what was going to be really important to them, and 1 or 2 other questions. So we set up a really simple type form. We sent it out to all the candidates, not making a judgment on what their CV was or wasn't. And 2 things happened. Firstly, some 40% of candidates didn't fill in the type form, which probably only took 4 or 5 minutes. And we'll have lost some good candidates in that pool, but creating a bit of friction, I think, was something that was a positive there. And then secondly, the data that we had coming back, we were much better placed to judge the relevance of that than we would be with a CV. So yes, we're still asking for CVs in that process, but the reality is we were judging things slightly differently. I think we'll probably also see more skills-based tools that are able to make assessments, maybe even reading into some of the things you've done previously to score you or to match you. And I think there's a danger there in terms of, again, we're not entirely sure what tools we're using and what judgments they're making, but hopefully just gives you an idea as to what I think might replace CVs. So I can't see any other questions coming through. So 2 more things. As I mentioned, feel free to drop me a message if you want to talk more about this. I mentioned the pilot we're looking at. If that's something that you think might be interested in, that we could plug into a hire that you're making and you're a bit fearful of being overwhelmed by the CVs, that I'd love to talk to you about seeing that in practice. I know that we would learn a lot from it, and hopefully you would do as well. Equally, if you've got any feedback on the session, then drop me a message. Apologies if I dropped off there for some of the bit along the way, but definitely keen to do more of these. So we'd love to know the sort of thing that would matter to people going forward. So thank you once again, and look forward to having a follow-up conversation with you on AI hiring, or indeed anything else around recruiting and startups and scale-ups. Thanks all.